Module 4 is about practicing two specific styles of influence, the asserting style and the bridging style. In order to practice this, you'll have to do it with another person. It's not enough just to think about it, write about it, or simply talk about it. You have to engage in conversation with another person. So the exercise itself will be based on the two areas that you reflected on in your own team experience. The area where you have complaints about other folks in your team, and where you're clear that you have a strong disagreement with colleagues or team members that you work with. For each of those, we want you to practice the asserting style or the bridging style. Asserting style will go with complaints and bridging will go with disagreements. This is a primer for how to do those two exercises, and the rest of the exercise will be carried out through an exploration with your peers and the course facilitator in the discussion groups and the discussion pages on Spark. So in this exercise, with asserting, you're going to start again with the complaint that you have about someone in your team or a colleague. The exercise will involve you practicing using asserting style through the 5 specific asserting language acts that were covered in Module 2. We'll review those so that you'll know what you're talking about and how to use them. And these acts are powerful because even if you're in a situation where you have no authority, you have no formal power, you can use asserting style to influence another. And you can do it without having to rely on power or be diminished by your relationship with power in that circumstances. This is often a really difficult thing to do because specifically of the dynamic of power. And again, we'll be using the real issue that you face. It'll be a chance to explore. As with the bridging practice, the asserting practice is going to be, my analogy would be like tennis. In tennis, if you want to get better at at your game, you practice a specific stroke. And in practice, you'll practice that stroke many times over and over again. And you might be practicing your backhand. Now, the backhand isn't the whole game, and we all know that. But when you're engaged in practice, you want to focus solely on the backhand. So this conversation and this practice may feel a bit unbalanced, and it might feel a little bit uncomfortable because you'd like to draw on other styles, other language behaviors, and skills in order to influence the other person. But I'd encourage you to remember that this particular exercise is just about practice. And you want to give yourself the freedom to engage in that practice and learn from the practice. It's not to do it well. And we've set these exercises up so it's not high stakes. And in order for you to succeed in this, you're not looking to achieve a particular outcome. That gives you the freedom to practice in a way that is useful for your learning. And finally, of course, we'll come back from whatever practice you engage in. And in the discussion pages, engage in a conversation about what works and what can you learn from practicing that particular skill. There's another dimension, particularly around asserting, that's important to consider, and that's the influence of power. Many of us tie the capacity to be effective by asserting our will to our relationship with power. And so let's look at power again. We talked about this in Module 1. There's 2 different kinds of power. There's authority power, positional power, given by the organization or the institution. In the bank, this looks like the work that many of you are familiar with in terms of developing terms of reference. The terms of reference gives you the authority and decision rights and the resources required to execute on a particular function. Without those terms of reference, you don't have the authority to do work in a particular area. Under those terms of reference, you have the ability and capacity to execute as you see fit. Status power is different. It isn't given by the organization, the company, or the institution. It is only derived from in a way, the consent of the social group in which you find yourself. The aspect of status power that's important is it's derived from the level of respect. The respect for you and your integrity, or perhaps your expertise, your charisma, or there may be a particular skill set that you have that no one else has. And it might have to do with credibility. Any aspect of that is a piece of status power. Status power comes from a different source. It's never given by the company, organization, or institution. Status power is derived in the social group. And status power is reflected in the level of respect one has from your peers. It could be based on your expertise, your level of credibility, integrity, honesty, a particular skill or charisma or energy can influence status power. It's interesting to see when status power is assumed in a group, because the group will often punish the individual who's trying to take that status power. The language we'd hear around that is somebody looking at another person and saying, who do they think they are? They can't do that. We hear language like that when somebody oversteps their status power. And it's not the organization that corrects them, it's the group. The group punishes them in social ways as opposed to formal ways. So as we look at influence and using assertive behavior, know that the use of power can have a positive or a negative impact. When we're using positive power efficiently, it generates respect, confidence, and trust. Ineffectively, it can create fear, competition, or irrelevance in a social context. As it pertains to asserting style and the use of assertion in power, it's really important to begin to develop the capacity to disaggregate or unconnect our relationship between power and our ability to assert. There's a funny dynamic that occurs when we see our capacity and our effectiveness in asserting related to positional or formal power. It can often, in that case, devolve, when it's not going well, into two kind of dysfunctional behaviors. One is that we can become very aggressive based on a situation in which we hold formal power and people are not agreeing with us. Our assertive behavior will push ourselves over into aggression. This is pretty common. On the other side of it, when we don't hold the formal authority or positional power, when we're inferior to someone else, our relationship with asserting is to become submissive in the face of their positional power. The challenge, and what we think you can do, is to find the sweet spot, which is neither aggressive nor submissive, but it's pure assertion of will somewhere in the middle. There's several examples of this on the Spark site in video, where you can see the ability to exercise your will without becoming aggressive or submissive. In the asserting exercise that you'll be doing for this module, you'll have a specific conversation. And in that conversation, you're going to use these 5 statements in order to address the complaint you have with another person. You'll say to the other person, however you set up the conversation to start, you'll quickly engage in, here's what I'd like to talk to you about. I like what's happening in this area. I don't like what's happening in this area. Here's what I want or I request, and if you do this, I will be able to do that. If you don't do this, I'll have to do something else. If you notice, all of the statements start with I. Being assertive and using the influence style of asserting is about asserting your will. It's about putting you front and center. Many of us are uncomfortable with this. So although the statements in themselves are very simple, and we often say things like, I don't like, I want, and we use the exchange statements, if you do X, I'll do Y, or if you don't do X, I'll do Z. But in this context, as you address another person directly around a particular issue or complaint, many people are uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable for lots of reasons, for history, culture, our own sense of what is right and what is wrong. And as a consequence, we tend to mitigate our communication, be less direct, speak in softer ways, and diminish our will in the circumstance. When that happens, our ability to influence goes down. So again, this is like practicing the backhand. It's not the whole story, but I want you to try this exercise with a little bit of rigor in terms of staying with these statements and noticing your own response as you do. So here are some do's and don'ts. Do definitely pick a situation that is not high stakes. We ask you to identify 3 complaints. Pick one of those 3 and pick a situation and a time and a place where you are free to interact. Don't do it in a public setting where you're in the middle of your workspace. Find a coffee shop or a place, a meeting room in which you can have this brief conversation. Do stick to the 5 statements. The point here is to practice the asserting. And you want to be kind of a researcher of yourself. Observe your own reaction. Observe the other person's reaction as you're saying these 5 statements. And be prepared to report about that. You do want to listen attentively. And if you're dealing with someone who tends to try and explain away the situation rather than deal with your direct request, repeat your 5 statements at least one time. Say, thanks very much. Let me tell you, here's what I like, here's what I don't like, here's what I want. If you're able to do that, I'll do this. If you're not able to do that, I'll do another thing. But be prepared to say those 5 statements at least once and maybe twice. And you might go for a 3rd time if it feels like the right thing to do. And this is a fairly short conversation. You can complete it and then move away. So disengage. Have this be a single issue conversation and then step away and return to whatever it is you were doing before that. As you get a chance to have this experience, do come back to the discussion forum and let's have a conversation about it. And one thing to know is you're making a request. The person who you're making that request of, with whom you have a complaint, can respond to your request with, yes, I accept your request, I'll do what you're asking. No, I'm not going to do that. Completely legitimate response. It does mean, though, that the last exchange statement, which is if you don't do this, I'll do that, is something you have to be prepared to do. Or they can actually counteroffer. When you get to what it is that you want, they can say, well, I'll do this part of it, or I'll do it in this way, not in exactly the way that you're doing, and then you can accept that. So be prepared for that. Don't wait till you feel comfortable. You're not going to feel comfortable. Don't try and rationalize or soften the expression of your will. This is a chance to really practice that backhand of assertion. And don't try and change their mind. If they do, great. If they don't, you've got a clear path forward anyway. The other particular skill that we want you to engage in, or style that we want you to practice, is the bridging style. And as you recall, the bridging style is much more where assertion is about will, and it's push. The bridging style is much more about pull. You're attempting to pull them towards you. You're not pushing your will on them, but you're trying to draw them to you. And the kinds of skills that you do to do that are inquiring, listening for understanding, disclosing, finding common ground, those kinds of behaviors. So in this exercise, you'll be looking for someone with whom you know you have a disagreement. And you'll have to work with the bridging skills in order to see what impact they have in influencing the other person. And it's hard. It's hard, particularly when you know someone disagrees with something that you have a fairly strong position about. Most of the time, what we want to do is we want to show how we're right and they're wrong. And it's important to know that if you can shift that into trying to understand how they're right, we already know how we're right. So let's find out how they're right. All the research indicates that capacity, the ability to inquire, the ability to engage someone in a bridging way and summarize what another's saying, is very influential in the face of difference. You don't have to push your point of view. There's something about making that move to bridge between you and the other that actually is incredibly influential. Again, we'll be using a real issue, and the bridging skills you want to focus on are using open-ended questions, restatement and paraphrasing, disclosing, finding common ground. All of those skills are useful ones to apply in this exercise. So in this exercise, you're going to use inquiry, summarizing, etc. And how you might set this up is you've already identified a topic of disagreement with a colleague. And follow these steps. See if you can do something like this. Again, find a time where you can have a private conversation. State what your position is as you start out the conversation and acknowledge the disagreement that you've had. Start by asking if that's accurate. Does your colleague see that the same way? And then just listen. And as they begin to talk, your behavior ought to be inquire, summarize or paraphrase. Maybe you point to where there's common ground. Maybe you disclose some things that will help you build trust in the situation. And the challenge that you're going to face as you do this exercise is not to repeat, not to continue with your point of view. It's really to draw them towards you. Stick to the bridging behaviors if you can. Try and inquire. Try and summarize or paraphrase. Draw them towards you. And of course, you're going to observe yourself as you do this. So the do's and don'ts for this exercise are: do choose a situation that isn't high stakes. Find a place where you can have a private conversation. Stick to the bridging behaviors, inquire and summarizing principally. You can also engage with finding common ground, disclosing where it's appropriate. You do want to listen attentively. And again, this is a relatively short conversation. Your purpose is to understand them better, not to convince them of anything, and report on your experience and what you observe about yourself and the other person as you engage in this behavior. This is another situation to not wait until you feel comfortable. Don't think you're going to change their mind. Don't get trapped in defending your position. Stick to the bridging behaviors. And don't get into an argument or try and convince them of your point of view.